Don't do this. Please, think again.
Impossible fact, an entire alien district survived a total oxygen collapse because one silent human refused to fix it. And when the universe demanded logic, he answered with something far more dangerous: emotion. If you want to know why a single heartbeat rewrote an empire, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe to help this channel grow. Now let's begin. The turbine screamed like something dying, but nobody came to check. Jonah Hale crouched in the maintenance shaft of Sector 7, his hands black with grease, his lungs thick with recycled air that tasted like rust and desperation. Above him, aristocrats in golden respiratory masks walked past the access panel without a glance. To them, he was furniture, a tool that fixed other tools. He tightened the compression bolt with practiced silence. The turbine's scream dropped to a hum. Somewhere in the district, 200,000 people breathed a little easier. None of them would know why. None of them would care. That was fine. Jonah had stopped expecting gratitude around the same time he learned that humans were something to be tolerated, not respected. He climbed out of the shaft, wiping his hands on a rag that had been clean 3 years ago. An aristocrat brushed past him, silver skin gleaming under bioluminescent panels. The alien didn't apologize, didn't even register the collision. Jonah steadied himself against the wall and kept walking. The cafeteria was half empty when he arrived. He grabbed a tray of nutrient paste that probably violated several health codes and found his usual corner. Alone. Always alone. But that was fine too. Solitude was predictable. Solitude didn't laugh when you walked by. Then he saw her. She sat 3 tables away, holding a utensil like it might explode. Her silver skin flickered with bioluminescent patterns that dimmed and brightened in rhythm with her breathing. Beautiful in the way distant stars are beautiful. Untouchable. But what caught Jonah's attention wasn't her appearance. It was the way her hands trembled, the way she flinched when someone dropped a tray across the room, the way her light went out completely when 2 aristocrats walked past, laughing at something Jonah couldn't hear. He recognized that posture. He'd worn it himself for years. Without thinking, Jonah stood. His feet carried him across the cafeteria before his brain could object. He stopped at her table, tray in hand, and said the first thing that came to mind. "You want company?" She froze. Her bioluminescence flickered like a candle in wind. For a long moment she just stared at him with eyes that held too much weight for someone so young. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "Yes." Jonah sat. They didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. He ate his paste. She picked at hers. But something shifted in the air between them. Something neither of them had names for yet. "I'm Jonah," he said finally. "LRI." Her voice was soft, fragile, like she wasn't used to using it. "Nice to meet you, LRI." And for the first time since he'd entered the cafeteria, her bioluminescence stabilized. A soft, steady glow that made the corner of the room feel less empty. Jonah didn't notice the aristocrat watching from the doorway, didn't see the way Lord Vakar's expression twisted with something between disgust and rage, but Ellery did. Her light flickered, dimmed. "Ignore him," Jonah said quietly, though he didn't know who he was talking about. She looked at him with something close to wonder. "How?" "Practice." He took another bite of paste. Lots of practice. Behind them, something mechanical clattered across the floor. Jonah glanced back to see an old cleaning bot, half its panels missing, rolling toward their table like a loyal dog that had forgotten it was supposed to be deactivated. Ailari's light brightened slightly, almost like a laugh. Lord Vakar's voice cut through the cafeteria like broken glass. How quaint! The human found another broken thing to collect. The room went silent. Ailari's light died completely. Jonah kept eating. Didn't look up. Didn't react. Because reacting only made it worse. But under the table, Ailari's hand found his. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to feel how badly she was shaking. and for reasons he couldn't explain, Jonah's world felt a little less empty than it had 5 minutes ago. They met for lunch every day after that. Jonah never announced it. HFY never asked permission. It just happened, the way weather happens. Natural, inevitable, and slowly, carefully, something began to grow in the space between them. On the 3rd day, HFY laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath, triggered by Jonah's deadpan observation that the nutrient paste tasted like recycled boot leather. But the moment she laughed, the dust on their table spiraled upward in a tiny whirlwind, spinning like a miniature galaxy before settling back down. HFY's eyes went wide. Her bioluminescence flickered with panic. Jonah just wiped dust off his tray. Neat trick. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "HFY." He met her eyes. "It's fine." She stared at him like he'd just spoken a language that didn't exist. Nobody had ever called her abilities fine before. They'd called them dangerous, volatile, wrong. On the 7th day, Jonah pulled out his maintenance logbook. It was supposed to be filled with technical notes and repair schedules. Instead, the margins were crowded with sketches, tiny drawings of turbines, air ducts, geometric patterns, the doodles of someone whose hands needed to move to keep his mind quiet. "You draw?" HFY leaned closer, her light brightening with something that looked like genuine interest. "Not really, just scribbles when I'm bored." She traced one of the patterns with her finger, careful not to touch the page. "They're beautiful." Jonah felt his face warm. Nobody had ever called his drawings beautiful before. Nobody had ever looked at them, period. What he didn't know was that HFY began collecting every sketch he absent-mindedly left behind, tucking them away like sacred texts, like proof that beauty could exist in forgotten corners. The cleaning bot became their unofficial companion. It followed Jonah everywhere, beeping softly whenever aristocrats got too close. On the 8th day, when Lord Vekar shoved Jonah hard enough to send him stumbling, the bot positioned itself between them, panels rattling in mechanical defiance. Vekar kicked the bot aside. It clattered across the floor but kept beeping, kept rolling back. HFY's hands clenched around her utensil. The air pressure in the cafeteria shifted, just slightly, just enough to make Vekar's breath catch. He glared at her. "Control yourself." She looked down. The pressure normalized. But Jonah saw the way her shoulders shook, the way her light pulsed with barely contained something. The campaign against Jonah escalated quickly after that. Insults became shoves. Shoves became sabotage. He'd arrive at job sites to find his tools missing. His work schedules altered. His security clearances mysteriously revoked and then reinstated after hours of bureaucratic hell. The other human workers kept their distance. Getting close to Jonah meant becoming targets themselves. He understood. He didn't blame them. But HFY stayed. On the 14th day, Jonah opened his toolkit to find every wrench bent beyond use, every diagnostic probe shattered. It must have taken someone hours to sabotage them so thoroughly. He stared at the wreckage for a long moment. Then he closed the case and walked away. He had backup tools hidden in 3 different locations. People who thought breaking equipment would break him didn't understand how long he'd been surviving. But that night, in the privacy of his quarters, he allowed himself 30 seconds of rage. Just 30 seconds of wanting to scream at the injustice of existing while invisible. Then he packed his emergency toolkit and went to bed. He didn't see HFY watching from her window across the courtyard, didn't see the way her bioluminescence flared bright enough to illuminate her entire quarters, didn't see the tears that left luminescent traces down her silver skin. The next morning, Jonah arrived at the primary filtration hub for routine maintenance. The moment he opened the main panel, he knew something was wrong. The compression seals had been deliberately loosened. If he had activated the system, the blowback would have killed him instantly. His hands didn't shake as he carefully tightened each seal. But his mind raced. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder. Someone wanted him dead, and they were willing to risk the district's entire air supply to make it happen. The council chamber smelled like ozone and old power. Jonah stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 12 Ishera aristocrats whose bioluminescent patterns pulsed with synchronized contempt. Lord Vikar held up the damaged compression seals like evidence at a trial. "Sabotage," Vikar announced. "This human deliberately compromised our air filtration systems. We should revoke his citizenship and exile him immediately." Jonah said nothing. Speaking would only make it worse. They'd already decided his guilt. This hearing was just theater. Then the chamber doors opened. Ellery entered with her head high, her bioluminescence steady and bright. Every aristocrat in the room turned to stare. She never attended council sessions. She was too broken, too dangerous, too carefully kept in the margins where her power couldn't hurt anyone. "I was there," Ellery said, her voice carrying further than Jonah had ever heard it carry before. Jonah found the tampering. He fixed it. He saved the sector. The room's temperature dropped. Vikar's patterns flared angry red. "You dare speak for a human?" "I dare speak the truth." Laughter rippled through the council, not joyful laughter, the kind that cuts. Several aristocrats made comments in their language, words Jonah didn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. Ellery's light flickered, dimmed. Her shoulders curved inward. Jonah recognized that collapse. He'd seen it in mirrors. The air grew heavy, thick, like breathing through wet cloth. Several council members gasped, their golden masks suddenly insufficient. Ellery's hands trembled at her sides, her eyes wide with horror at what she was doing, what she couldn't stop doing. Then she saw a small alien child in the gallery, a mute youngling who'd been brought by her parents. The child was struggling to breathe, her tiny hands clutching her throat. Ellery's power cut off instantly. The pressure normalized. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The council erupted in outrage. Security moved toward her, but Lord Vikar raised a hand, stopping them. He approached Ellery slowly, each step deliberate. "This is why you don't feel," he said softly, cruelly. "This is why we sealed you. Because you're too dangerous to have emotions, too broken to be trusted." He looked at Jonah with undisguised hatred. "And he's making you worse. Afástese do humano o será punida. Stay away from the human, or face consequences far worse than embarrassment." Jonah wanted to argue, wanted to defend her. But what could he say? That she wasn't dangerous? The evidence was currently gasping for air around them. They released him with a warning. The charges were dropped, but his record was marked. One more incident, and he'd be gone. Ellery waited for him outside the council building, her light barely visible in the artificial dusk of the underground city. Her eyes were red from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I made everything worse. You defended me. Nobody's ever done that before. I hurt a child, Jonah. I nearly suffocated." Her voice broke. "This is why they're right. I am dangerous." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the danger wasn't in her power but in the people who'd taught her to fear it. But words felt insufficient. Instead, he sat down on the steps beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, not saying anything, just being there. In the shadows across the plaza, the mute child watched them. She'd been observing Jonah for weeks, fascinated by the human who moved through the world like he was made of water, who bent without breaking, who stayed kind even when kindness earned him nothing but pain. She wanted to tell him something. Wanted to explain what she'd found in the old archives beneath the city. But her voice didn't work the way other people's voices worked, so she just watched and hoped they'd survive long enough for her to find the words. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Ellery pulled out the collection of Jonah's drawings. She arranged them carefully on her floor, creating patterns. Constellations made of maintenance sketches, and in the center, she whispered to the empty room, "I am perigosa demais para sentir." Too dangerous to feel. She didn't notice the way her bioluminescence pulsed softly in rhythm with the words. didn't see the way the air around the drawings moved, just slightly, like breath. But somewhere deep in the maintenance systems, sensors recorded an unusual atmospheric fluctuation, brief, localized, gone before anyone could investigate, the kind of reading that meant nothing to machines, but might have meant everything to anyone who understood what it meant when someone dangerous learned to feel anyway. The accident happened during a routine duct inspection. Jonah was 3 levels down in the maintenance network when the catwalk gave way. Not because it was old, because someone had cut through the support cables with precision that spoke of planning. He fell 4 meters onto a concrete platform. His shoulder hit first. Something cracked. The world went white with pain, then gray at the edges. He lay there for maybe a minute, maybe an hour. Time stopped meaning much when you couldn't tell which way was up. Footsteps approached from the darkness. Not rescue, not help. Just footsteps that stopped a few meters away and waited. "Should we finish it?" a voice asked in Yashera. "No. Let him bleed out naturally. Less evidence." The footsteps retreated. Jonah tried to move, tried to call out, but his voice came out as barely a wheeze. He was going to die alone in a maintenance tunnel, invisible even in death. Then the air pressure changed. Ailerai appeared out of nowhere, her bioluminescence blazing bright enough to hurt his eyes. She dropped beside him, her hands hovering over his body like she was afraid to touch, afraid of what she might feel. "No, no, no," she whispered. "Not you. Please, not you." "I'm okay," Jonah lied through bloody teeth. "You're not. You're—" She made a sound that might have been a sob or a scream. "I felt it. I felt your pain from 3 sectors away. I felt your fear. I felt—" She stopped, looked at him with eyes that held too many truths. "What do you mean, you felt it?" Jonah asked. Before she could answer, another figure emerged from the shadows, a human man, older, with the kind of steady hands that came from years of forbidden medical practice. Dr. Emil Roth, the clandestine physician who treated humans when the official medical system considered them too expensive to save. "Move," Roth ordered Ailerai. "I need to see the damage." She moved, but she didn't leave. She couldn't leave, because if she left, she'd stop feeling him. And if she stopped feeling him, she wouldn't know if he was still alive. Roth worked quickly, setting the shoulder, wrapping broken ribs, administering pain medication from supplies that were probably illegal. The whole time, he kept glancing at Ailerai with something between fascination and fear. "You felt him from 3 sectors away?" Roth asked. Ailerai nodded, not looking up. "Through solid rock and metal?" Another nod. Roth's expression shifted. He reached into his bag and pulled out a battered data pad. "I need to show you something, both of you." The file he opened was old, so old the text had been converted from physical records. It detailed experiments conducted centuries ago before humans had been systematically removed from Yashera territories. "Your people can sense emotions through atmospheric vibrations," Roth said, looking at Ailerai. "It's not telepathy. It's more like echolocation, but instead of sound waves, you read the micro-disturbances that emotions create in air pressure, humidity, temperature." Ailerai stared at the datapad. "That's not possible." "It's documented, and it's why your people once valued humans so highly. We don't produce the same vibrational patterns as Yashera. Our emotions don't overwhelm your senses. We stabilize you." They called it Resonancia Emocional Pacifica, peaceful emotional resonance. Jonah processed this through the haze of pain medication. So when everyone else makes her powers go haywire, "You're the only one who doesn't," Roth finished. "You're her anchor." Ailerai finally looked at Jonah, really looked at him, and for the first time she reached out and touched his hand. Not afraid, not hesitant, just touching. The pain in Jonah's shoulder didn't disappear, but it became distant, manageable, like someone had turned down the volume on his nerves. "You stabilize me," Ailerai whispered. "And I—" She stopped, wonder spreading across her face. "I can help you too," The cleaning bot chose that moment to roll into the tunnel, beeping frantically. It bumped against Jonah's leg, then against Rai, then back to Jonah, like it was trying to repair them both through sheer mechanical determination. Despite everything, Jonah laughed. The sound made Rai's bioluminescence pulse, and for just a moment, a tiny point of light appeared in the air between them, hovering, glowing, beautiful. It lasted only a second before winking out, but they'd all seen it, a manifestation of something that shouldn't be possible, a biological reaction that had never been recorded in any Wishera medical database. Roth stared at the space where the light had been. "Meu Deus," he whispered. "You're creating something new." Rai looked terrified. Jonah just squeezed her hand. "It's okay," he said. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." She nodded, didn't let go, and deep in the maintenance systems, sensors recorded another atmospheric anomaly. Stronger this time, more stable, growing. The emergency call came at 0300 hours. North Sector Filtration Hub. Critical failure imminent. All available technicians report immediately. Jonah knew it was a trap the moment he read the message. But he also knew that if the North Sector hub actually failed, 15,000 people would suffocate before backup systems could compensate. He couldn't ignore it. They were counting on that. He grabbed his toolkit. The cleaning bot followed, beeping warnings that sounded almost like words. Almost like, "Please don't go." "I'll be careful," Jonah promised a machine that probably couldn't understand him. The North Sector hub was located in one of the oldest parts of the district, where the architecture predated modern safety standards. The access tunnel was narrow, poorly lit, and filled with enough blind corners to hide an army. Jonah found the maintenance panel already open, tools scattered on the ground, signs of hasty work, and in the center of the room, 5 aristocrats in golden masks waiting like spiders in a web. Lord Vekar stepped forward. "We gave you a chance to leave. You chose her instead. That was unfortunate." They moved fast, faster than Jonah could react. His toolkit went flying. Something hit him in the ribs. He tried to block, tried to fight back, but 5 against 1 had always been math that didn't work in his favor. He went down hard, tasted blood, heard his own breathing turn wet and painful. "You're nothing," Vekar hissed, kicking Jonah in the stomach. "You'll always be nothing, and she'll finally understand that attachments to inferior species only bring pain." Jonah tried to speak, tried to tell them they were wrong, but his lungs wouldn't cooperate. Then the air pressure changed. Rai materialized out of the shadows like a ghost made of starlight. Her bioluminescence blazed brighter than Jonah had ever seen it, brighter than should have been possible. The aristocrats turned toward her, and that was their first mistake. The second was raising their weapons. The atmospheric pressure in the tunnel inverted. All 5 aristocrats dropped to their knees, gasping, their golden masks suddenly as useful as decorative jewelry. Rai didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with tears streaming down her face and murder written in the vibrations around her. "Stop!" Jonah wheezed. "Rai, stop!" She looked at him. Her expression broke his heart. She wanted to stop, wanted to be the person who didn't hurt anyone. But they'd beaten the one person who made her feel human, and something ancient and terrible had woken up inside her. The cleaning bot rolled between Rai and the aristocrats, beeping urgently. Its camera lens was recording everything: evidence, proof, salvation through surveillance. Rai's concentration shattered. The pressure normalized. The aristocrats collapsed, coughing, alive but traumatized. She ran to Jonah, pulling him upright with strength that surprised them both. "I'm okay," he lied again. "You're not. You're—" She stopped, her hands hovering over his injuries. "I can feel every broken bone, every torn muscle, every—" Her voice cracked. "You hurt so much and I couldn't stop it. You stopped it now, that's what matters." Security arrived minutes later. The cleaning bot's footage told the story clearly: unprovoked assault, attempted murder. Rai acting in defense of a registered citizen. The council had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Lord Vekar and his companions were detained pending investigation. Ailerai and Jonah were released with the Council's formal apology. It felt like victory, like justice had finally arrived for the invisible and the broken. They walked back to their quarters together, Ailerai supporting Jonah's weight, both of them exhausted but alive. The cleaning bot rolled alongside them, beeping with what sounded suspiciously like pride. "They'll leave us alone now," Ailerai said, hope coloring her words. "They have to." Jonah wanted to believe her, wanted to think that recorded evidence and formal apologies meant something in a system built on hierarchy and contempt. But he'd survived too long to trust easy victories. 3 hours later, the alarms started. At first, nobody understood what was happening. The displays showed normal pressure, normal oxygen levels, normal everything. But the air tasted wrong, felt wrong, and then the numbers started dropping. Slowly at first, then faster. The main respiratory system was failing, not from malfunction, from sabotage buried so deep in the infrastructure that it would take hours to find. Sabotage that had been planted during the fight. While everyone was distracted by violence, someone had ensured the real victory. By morning, the oxygen levels had dropped to 90% normal. Enough to notice, not enough to panic. Yet, Jonah stood in his quarters staring at emergency alerts flooding his datapad. He understood what was happening, understood what they'd done. They'd forced Ailerai to reveal her power, had documented it, proven she was dangerous, and now they'd created a crisis that only Jonah could solve. He was the only one who knew the system well enough, the only one with the security clearances to access the core infrastructure, the only one who could save them, and they'd made absolutely certain he'd never want to. Dr. Roth found the evidence buried in maintenance logs that hadn't been properly deleted. He arrived at Jonah's quarters at dawn, his face gray with exhaustion and fury. He threw his datapad onto the table hard enough to crack the screen. "They planned it," Roth said without preamble. "All of it. The sabotage, the ambush, the respiratory failure. They knew you were the only one who could fix the system. They've been maneuvering you for months." Jonah stared at the corrupted files scrolling across the damaged display. Work orders that predated the attack. Equipment requisitions that made no sense until you understood they were pieces of a larger trap. Communication logs between council members discussing the human problem and the Ailerai solution. "Why?" Jonah asked, though part of him already knew. "Because they want her to break," Roth said. "Fully, irreversibly. They want to prove she's too dangerous to exist outside their control. And the best way to do that is to force her to choose between you and everyone else." Ailerai stood by the window, her bioluminescence barely visible. She'd been silent since the alarms started. Silent in a way that scared Jonah more than screaming would have. "Tell him," Roth said to her. "Tell him what happened when you were 12. Ailerai's light flickered. "No." "He deserves to know what they're afraid of. He'll leave. Everyone leaves when they know." Jonah crossed to her, ignoring the pain in his still-healing ribs. "I'm not everyone." She looked at him with eyes that held decades of grief compressed into 23 years of existence. And then, quietly, she began to speak. "I was 12. I didn't understand my power yet, didn't know how to control it. I was in a school. There were hundreds of other children. And I got scared. Someone said something cruel, and I got scared, and I tried to defend myself, and—" Her voice broke. Jonah waited. The entire building collapsed, not from structural failure, from atmospheric pressure. I crushed it with air. 300 people died, most of them children. They were laughing and learning and alive, and then they weren't. Because I felt something I shouldn't have felt. The silence that followed was absolute. After that, Ailerai continued, they sealed me, surgically altered my emotional centers, made it so I couldn't feel strongly enough to hurt anyone. But it didn't work perfectly. The emotions were still there, just muted, distant, like watching the world through thick glass. "Until I met you," Jonah said softly. "Until you. You made me feel again. Real things. Strong things. And they knew it would happen. They've been monitoring me since we started eating lunch together. They knew you were stabilizing me. But they also knew that if I cared about something enough, if I loved something enough—" She stopped, the word hanging between them like a confession. "They knew I'd become dangerous again." Roth pulled up another file. "The respiratory system has a failsafe, a code that can shut down and reboot the entire network in case of catastrophic failure. Only the chief engineer knows it." "I'm not the chief engineer," Jonah said. "No, but you created it. 3 years ago. You wrote a custom protocol into the system without authorization because you didn't trust the official safety measures. They found your code during a routine audit 6 months ago." Jonah's blood went cold. The Midnight Project. The extra security layer he'd implemented because the official systems were vulnerable to exactly this kind of sabotage. He'd done it to protect people, and now that protection had made him indispensable. "They need you alive," Roth said, "but they need you desperate, so they've given you an impossible choice. Save the district and lose Alerai forever, or refuse and let 200,000 people suffocate. Either way she loses. Either way, they prove she's too dangerous to love." Outside, the mute child pressed her small hands against a window, looking up at Ailerai's quarters. She'd been trying to warn them for weeks. Had found records in the old archives, records that proved humans hadn't just stabilized Yshera. They'd ruled alongside them. Partners, equals. Until fear had turned partnership into genocide, she tried to mouth the words, tried to make them understand. But her voice was still broken, still searching for sounds that made sense. All she could do was write on the glass with condensation 3 words, over and over: "Save the silent one." Inside, the emergency broadcast crackled to life. The council's voice filled every speaker in the district. "Jonah Hale, you have 12 hours to report to the central hub, repair the respiratory system, or accept responsibility for the deaths of everyone in Car 7 district. Choose wisely." Then lower, almost too quiet to hear. "And Alerai, you will come with us, either as a free citizen if he cooperates, or as evidence of what happens when humans corrupt our people. You belong to the Imperio, not to him." The transmission ended. Alerai stood frozen, energy cuffs materializing around her wrists. They'd activated them remotely. She was locked in place, powerless, exactly as they'd planned. "Go," she whispered to Jonah. "Save them, please." But Jonah was already moving, not toward the door, toward her. He pulled her into his arms, cuffs and all, and held her like the world was ending. Because maybe it was. "You don't deserve to live with fear," he said against her hair. "Not anymore." And for the first time in his life, Jonah Hale chose to be seen, chose to matter, chose to make everyone who'd ever called him invisible understand exactly what they'd lost. He wasn't going anywhere. Let them all suffocate. Hour 1, oxygen at 85%. People complained of headaches. Hour 3, oxygen at 73%. The complaints became panic. Parents held children. The elderly struggled to breathe. Emergency medical centers overflowed with patients whose only symptom was living in a district that was slowly becoming a tomb. Hour 6, oxygen at 60%. The council broadcast another message, pleading, demanding, threatening. Jonah didn't respond. He sat on the floor of his quarters with Ailerai's head in his lap, carefully wiping away the luminescent tears that traced patterns down her silver skin. The energy cuffs prevented her from moving more than a few centimeters, made her a prisoner in her own body. "You have to go," she whispered for the 100th time. "They're dying." "So are you, just slower. I'm not worth 200,000 lives." Jonah's hand stilled. He looked down at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, just absolute certainty. "Yes," he said, "you are." She started crying harder, because nobody had ever said that to her. Nobody had ever chosen her over everything else. Love wasn't supposed to be selfish. Love wasn't supposed to let innocence die. But Jonah had spent his entire life being told he was worth nothing. Being told his work didn't matter, his existence didn't matter, his pain didn't matter, and he'd accepted it, survived it, made peace with being invisible. But they'd made one mistake, one fatal miscalculation. They'd given him something to lose, and then they'd threatened to take it away. Outside, the district descended into chaos. People rioted, looted, fought over the few remaining oxygen masks. The council deployed security forces to maintain order, but you can't shoot panic, can't arrest desperation. Dr. Roth tried to fix the system himself, spent 4 hours in the central hub surrounded by machinery he barely understood. The cleaning bot tried to help, beeping instructions that Roth couldn't interpret. Together they managed to restore oxygen to 58%. Not enough, not nearly enough. Hour 9, oxygen at 42%. Children stopped playing. Adults stopped pretending everything would be fine. The reality settled like concrete. They were going to die, all of them, because one human had finally decided he mattered. The council sent guards, 20 of them, armed, authorized to use lethal force if necessary. They surrounded Jonah's building, broke down the door, climbed the stairs with weapons charged and orders clear. Retrieve the human, by any means necessary. They burst into Jonah's quarters expecting resistance, expected fighting, expected the cleaning bot to get in their way. Instead, they found Jonah sitting calmly on the floor, Ellerai's head still in his lap. He looked up at them with eyes that held no fear, no anger, just exhausted acceptance. "No," Ellerai said. The word came out as barely a whisper, but the guards heard it. The whole district heard it, because when she spoke, the atmospheric pressure shifted, just slightly, just enough. The guards froze, not from Ellerai's power, from something far more terrifying. The realization that if they touched Jonah, if they hurt him, she would stop trying to be good, would stop fighting her nature, would become exactly what they'd always feared. "Stand down," their captain ordered. They didn't move, couldn't move, because moving meant choosing between following orders and surviving the consequences. Then Ellerai did something she'd never done before. She stood, the energy cuffs sparked, smoked, shattered, because fear had always been what controlled her, and she wasn't afraid anymore. She was tired, tired of being told she was dangerous, tired of being sealed and monitored and treated like a weapon that needed careful storage, tired of watching the only person who'd ever loved her be brutalized for the crime of caring. She looked at the guards, really looked at them, and they saw what Jonah had always seen. Someone who'd spent her entire life trying so hard to be small, to be safe, to be acceptable, and who'd finally run out of the strength it took to diminish herself. "Tear is Mo's deal," she said. "Take your hands off him." The air didn't crush them, didn't kill them, just held them, gentle, firm, absolute. The captain lowered his weapon. "We're sorry," he said. And he meant it. Because everyone in that room suddenly understood they'd spent years being complicit in something unforgivable. They'd convinced a woman she was a monster, and then they'd been surprised when she'd believed them. The guards retreated, left Jonah and Ellerai alone in quarters that suddenly felt sacred, untouchable. Hour 11. Oxygen at 36%. People stopped screaming. The silence was worse. The mute child sat by her window writing on the glass. Save the silent one, over and over, until her parents found her and pulled her away, because the air was getting too thin for children to waste energy on futile gestures. But she'd seen something her parents hadn't, had understood something the council refused to acknowledge. Silence wasn't weakness. It was choice. And the quietest person in the district had just made the loudest decision in its history. He'd chosen love over survival, chosen dignity over obedience. He'd chosen to matter. And somewhere deep in the failing respiratory system, Jonah's custom code waited, patient, ready, knowing that sooner or later its creator would come, but only on his terms, only when they understood that invisible didn't mean worthless, that quiet didn't mean compliant, that humanity's greatest strength had never been violence or technology or conquest. It had always been this: the stubborn refusal to abandon the people they loved, even when love cost everything, especially then. The guards didn't come back, but Dr. Roth did, along with 6 other humans. Maintenance workers Jonah recognized from years of silent nods in corridors, people who'd kept their distance because proximity to him meant danger. They stood in his doorway, breathing hard in the thinning air, and said 3 words: "Not alone, never alone." The mute child arrived next. Her parents had fallen unconscious from oxygen deprivation. She'd dragged herself 3 sectors to reach Jonah's building, pulled by something stronger than self-preservation. She held a datapad in trembling hands, words she couldn't speak but had finally found. Roth took the datapad, read. His face went pale. "Meu Deus, this is from the original settlement archives, before the segregation, before..." He looked at Alorai. "Your people didn't just tolerate humans. You needed them. They were rulers, partners. The Resonancia Emotional wasn't a curiosity. It was the foundation of your entire civilization." Alorai's bioluminescence flickered. "That's impossible." "It's documented. Humans and Yshera governed together for 3,000 years. Your people could feel the emotional state of entire populations, could sense unrest, suffering, joy. But it drove you mad, made you feel too much, too intensely. Until humans arrived, we stabilized you, made it possible for you to use your gifts without being destroyed by them." "Then what happened?" Jonah asked. "Fear. Some Yshera realized that dependency meant vulnerability. If humans ever left, your entire society would collapse. So they orchestrated a pogrom, killed most of the human population, rewrote the histories, made it seem like humans were always subordinate, always less." The cleaning bot beeped. On its display screen, it projected archival images. Yshera and humans working together, building cities, raising children, creating art that blended both species' unique perspectives into something transcendent. Proof, irrefutable proof that everything the Council had taught was a lie. Alorai stared at the images, at the possibilities that had been stolen from her, from all of them. More people arrived. Not guards, citizens, regular people who'd spent 12 hours watching their district die, and had finally asked themselves the question everyone asks too late. Why? Why did one human matter less than 200,000 Yshera? Why was his pain acceptable? His humiliation entertainment? His love something to punish? They didn't have answers, but they had presence, bodies in doorways, witnesses to whatever happened next. The Council transmitted one final message. No demands this time, just facts. Oxygen at 28%. Children are dying. The elderly are dead. You have 2 hours before everyone in this district suffocates. The choice is yours. Alorai looked at Jonah. He looked back. And in that moment, they both understood something the Council never had. Love wasn't the weakness they needed to eliminate. Love was the strength they'd spent centuries trying to destroy, because love made people brave, made them see each other as more than resources to exploit, made them unwilling to accept systems built on hierarchy and contempt. Love was dangerous, just not in the way the Council feared. Jonah stood. His legs were unsteady from sitting for 12 hours. His injuries ached, but he was done kneeling. "I'll fix the system," he said. "But not for them." He looked at the crowd that had gathered. Humans and Yshera. The invisible and the complicit. all of them breathing the same dying air. I'll fix it because you deserve to live, because your children deserve to grow up, because choosing who deserves air and who deserves dignity is how we ended up here in the first place." He turned to Ellery, took her hand. She gripped back hard enough to hurt. "And they're going to listen to what we have to say. All of us. Not because we're asking nicely, not because we're grateful for the opportunity, but because the person who decides if this district breathes tomorrow." He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent his entire life being underestimated and had finally gotten tired of pretending it didn't bother him. "Is me." The walk to the council chamber took 20 minutes. Every step was witnessed, recorded. The cleaning bot rolled ahead, projecting archival images onto every available surface. The mute child walked beside Ellery, her small hand in the alien woman's larger one. Dr. Roth and the other humans formed a protective barrier, not to keep people out, to show that Jonah wasn't alone anymore, had never really been alone, just invisible to people who'd taught themselves not to see. The council waited in their chamber, 12 aristocrats whose bioluminescent patterns flickered with barely contained panic. They'd won, hadn't they? They'd forced the human to comply, proven that survival always trumps dignity. Except Jonah wasn't walking like someone who'd been beaten. He was walking like someone who'd finally figured out the rules to a game he'd been losing for years, and was about to flip the entire board. Jonah stood in the center of the council chamber with 200 witnesses at his back and 12 aristocrats who'd forgotten what accountability looked like in front of him. Lord Vekar spoke first. "You came? Good. Fix the system immediately and—" "No." The word echoed in the chamber like a gunshot. "Excuse me?" Vekar's bioluminescence flared red. "I said no. You don't give orders anymore. You listen, and if you don't like what you hear, you can hold your breath and see how long your superiority lasts." The council erupted in outrage. Security moved forward, but Ellery stepped beside Jonah and the air pressure shifted, not threatening, just present. A reminder of what would happen if anyone touched him again. "I have 3 conditions," Jonah continued, his voice steady despite the thinning oxygen making his head swim. "Non-negotiable. Accept them all, or I walk away and you die trying to fix a system you never bothered to understand. You would murder 200,000 people. You did. You sabotaged your own district to maintain control. You've been murdering humans for centuries to maintain a lie, so don't lecture me about morality when you're standing in a grave you dug yourself." Silence, the kind that comes right before everything changes forever. "Condition 1, Jonah said. Ellery goes free. No restrictions, no monitoring, no energy cuffs. She gets full citizenship with all rights and protections, and nobody ever touches her again. She's too dangerous." "She's dangerous because you taught her to be. Because you sealed her emotions and then blamed her for feeling anyway. You created the weapon you feared. That ends now." Vekar's patterns flickered. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras recording everything, at the children dying in medical centers. He had no choice, and he knew it. "Agreed." Condition 2, humans receive equal status, full citizenship, equal pay, equal protection under law. The segregation ends today, and you publish the real histories. All of them. Let everyone see what you tried to erase. The cleaning bot projected more images. Yashera and humans building together, loving together, creating a civilization that had thrived for millennia on mutual respect instead of exploitation. "That would destabilize everything," a council member whispered. "Good. It should be destabilized. You built a society on lies and corpses. Time to try something different." Minutes passed. Children wheezed in hospital beds. Adults collapsed in the streets. The oxygen level dropped to 23%. Critical, minutes from cascading failure. "Agreed," Vekar said. The word came out like poison. Condition 3, I want it in writing, signed by every council member, broadcasted to every citizen. No backroom deals, no convenient accidents later. You acknowledge what you did, you apologize, you change, or I let you suffocate on the same air you've been using to keep us down for generations." This time the silence lasted longer, because admitting guilt meant accepting consequences, meant facing populations they'd oppressed, meant rebuilding entire social structures from the ground up. But oxygen at 23% was persuasive. "Agreed." Jonah nodded once. "Then let's fix your system." The central hub was worse than he'd expected. The sabotage had been layered, redundant, designed to be impossible to fix without the original code. Without Jonah. He opened the main access panel and stared at machinery that shouldn't have been failing, that he'd personally maintained, that someone had deliberately destroyed while making it look like natural degradation. "I need help," he said. Ellery stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." I need you to sense where the failures are. Feel the air flow. Tell me where it's blocked, where it's leaking. I can't see inside the walls, but you can feel it." She looked terrified. "If I lose control—" "You won't, because I'm right here. Use me to stay stable. We do this together." She closed her eyes. Her bioluminescence flared brighter than the sun, and for the first time in her life, she stopped fighting her power, stopped trying to be small, stopped apologizing for existing. She let it out. Atmospheric readings across the entire district spiked. Ellery could feel every pocket of trapped air, every severed connection, every point of failure in a system that spanned hundreds of kilometers. "Northwest Junction," she gasped. "Something's blocking the primary feed." Jonah ran diagnostics, found the blockage, a collapsed support beam that shouldn't have collapsed. He rerouted flow through auxiliary channels while Roth and the other humans ran through tunnels, manually opening emergency valves that had been sealed. "Secondary hub," Ellery continued. "Pressure differential, like something's been cut." The cleaning bot rolled ahead, using sensors Jonah had never known it had. It found the severed line. Roth jury-rigged a connection using parts that definitely violated safety codes but would hold long enough. The mute child sat in the control room, watching displays. When oxygen levels rose even 0.5%, she'd hum. Not words, just sound. Just enough to keep them focused, keep them fighting. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time stopped mattering when you were racing death. Jonah's hands were bloody from working without gloves. His ears rang from exposure to atmospheric pressure fluctuations that human bodies weren't designed to handle. Something in his left ear popped. Went silent. Permanent damage. The price of standing too close to Ellery when she used her full power. He didn't care. Some prices were worth paying. "One more," Ellery whispered. "There's one more blockage, in the core system, where your code is." Jonah entered the final command sequence, the custom protocol he'd written 3 years ago, the failsafe the Council had never known existed until they needed it. The system hummed, stuttered, then roared to life. Oxygen flooded back into the district, clean, pure, life-giving. People gasped, cried, collapsed in relief. Parents held children who'd been moments from death. The elderly opened their eyes for the first time in hours. The district lived, because a human who'd spent his life being invisible had finally decided to be seen. And because a woman who'd been told she was too dangerous to love had finally found someone worth the risk. Jonah turned to Ellery. She was glowing so brightly he could barely look at her. But he looked anyway, always looked. Because she deserved to be seen too. She caught him as he collapsed, his body finally giving out. He'd given everything. Broken himself to save people who tried to break him first. The district watched in silence as Ellery held him, as she cried luminescent tears that pooled on the floor like scattered stars, as she whispered words in languages that didn't have translations but meant something like, "Thank you, and I love you, and please don't leave me now." He didn't leave, just rested, because for once in his life, he knew he was safe. The Council signed the documents, broadcast the apologies, released the histories, and the district learned that the human who'd saved them hadn't done it because they deserved it, hadn't done it because he was good, hadn't done it because of duty or honor or any noble reason they wanted to believe. He'd done it because loving someone meant choosing them, even when choosing them cost everything, especially then. 6 months later, the district looked different, not in architecture, not in layout, but in the way people moved through it. Humans walked with their heads up now. Yashera nodded greetings instead of looking through them. Children of both species played together in courtyards that had once been segregated by invisible but absolute lines. The cleaning bot had been officially registered as a citizen, mechanical entity designation CF7, but everyone just called it 7. It still followed Jonah everywhere, beeping warnings about aristocrats who got too close, though now the warnings were mostly unnecessary. Jonah co-administered the respiratory systems now. Equal partner with Yashera engineers who'd spent 6 months learning that the human they'd ignored had been keeping them alive all along. Some were resentful. Most were just embarrassed. A few became friends. He'd lost most of his hearing in his left ear. Sometimes Alarai felt guilty about that. He always told her the same thing. Some silences were worth trading for the chance to hear her voice. She'd stopped trying to be small, stopped apologizing for existing. Now she taught young Yashera how to control their abilities, how to feel without fear, how to understand that power wasn't the problem. Fear of power was, and she did it all while glowing brighter than she'd ever allowed herself to glow before. Dr. Roth ran a medical center now, official, legal, funded by the council as part of their reparations. He treated everyone equally, though he still kept his old black market supplies, just in case governments decided to go back on promises. They usually did. The mute child could speak now. Her name was Senna. Her first word had been Jonah. Her second had been safe. Her parents cried when they heard her voice, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because she'd been silent for so long they'd forgotten what hope sounded like. She visited Jonah and Ailerai every week, brought them small gifts, drawings, flowers grown in underground gardens that shouldn't have been able to support life, but did anyway. She'd decided that impossible things were just things that hadn't happened yet. The archives were open now. Anyone could read the true histories, could see how humans and Yashera had built something beautiful together, how fear had poisoned it, how lies had sustained it, and how one quiet man and one dangerous woman had refused to accept that some people mattered less than others. On the 6-month anniversary of the day the district almost died, they held a ceremony. In the central plaza where aristocrats had once paraded in golden masks, they planted something new, an air tree, a genetically engineered organism that produced pure oxygen through bioluminescent photosynthesis. Beautiful, functional, impossible to weaponize or control, symbol of a future where nobody owned the right to breathe. Jonah and Ailerai planted it together, their hands in soil that had never felt sunlight, roots taking hold in darkness, growing anyway. The district watched, thousands of people, bearing witness, remembering, promising to do better, knowing they probably wouldn't, knowing they had to try anyway. When the tree was planted, Ailerai turned to Jonah. They stood in the center of everything, surrounded by people who'd learned to see them, and she did something she'd wanted to do since the day he'd asked if she wanted company. She pressed her forehead against his. The air around them hummed, vibrated, sang with frequencies that had no names but felt like peace, like home, like the sound the universe makes when two people who were never supposed to meet decide to stay anyway. The atmospheric sensors throughout the district recorded the readings. Scientists studied them for months. Eventually, they gave the phenomenon an official designation, Resonancia di affetto umano, human affection, resonance, the first documented case of emotions creating measurable changes in atmospheric pressure without fear or pain as the source. Just love, just two people choosing each other in a world that had told them they couldn't. That night, in the quarters they now shared, Ailerai asked the question she'd been afraid to ask. What if they come back? The old council, the old ways, What if 6 months from now they decide this was all a mistake? Jonah was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. The same smile he'd worn when he'd told the council he was the one who decided who breathed tomorrow. Let them try. We know something now that we didn't know before. What's that? We're not alone. And we're not quiet anymore. He was right, because across the district, in quarters and workshops and medical centers and schools, humans and we Shera were learning to live differently. Learning that the invisible could be seen, that the dangerous could be loved, that systems built on hierarchy and contempt could be dismantled by people who simply refused to accept them. It wouldn't be easy. It would never be easy. Change never was, but it would happen. Because once people understood they mattered, you couldn't convince them they didn't. Once they learned their voices had power, you couldn't make them silent again. And because somewhere in the galaxy, on thousands of other worlds, other humans were being underestimated, being told they were less, being treated as tools instead of people. But they were also being quiet, being patient, being exactly what everyone expected them to be, until they weren't. Until they decided that enough was enough, that love was worth fighting for, that dignity wasn't negotiable. Until they stood in front of councils and corporations and empires and said the words that changed everything. Not anymore, not ever again. Humanity didn't win because they were stronger, didn't win because they were smarter, didn't win because they had better weapons or bigger armies or more advanced technology. They won because they refused to stop caring, because they looked at people everyone else had given up on and said, "You matter," because they built relationships in the margins and found strength in the spaces between power and powerlessness. They won because when the entire universe told them to be invisible, they chose to be seen. When they were told to be quiet, they chose to speak. When they were told that some people weren't worth saving, they saved them anyway. Not because it was easy, not because it made sense, not because anyone would thank them, but because being human meant believing that everyone deserved air to breathe, space to exist, and someone who'd hold them when the world tried to make them small. And if that belief made them dangerous, good. The universe needed more dangerous love, more quiet revolutions, more invisible people who decided that maybe, just maybe, they'd been visible all along. The world had just learned to look away, but not anymore. Never again. In the darkness of their quarters, Ellerai's bioluminescence created patterns on the ceiling, constellations that shifted and changed. Jonah watched them, half asleep, his damaged ear pressed against the pillow, his working ear filled with the sound of her breathing. "Jonah?" she whispered. "Yeah." "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible too." He pulled her closer. "Always." Outside, the air tree glowed, its bioluminescence visible from every sector. A beacon, a promise, a reminder. Some things were worth fighting for. Some silences were worth breaking. And some people, the quietest ones, the most invisible ones, the ones everyone underestimated, they were the ones who'd change everything, one breath at a time. In the end, perhaps the quietest truth of all is that humanity was never about strength or dominance, but about the stubborn, ridiculous, infuriating decision to care anyway. Jonah didn't save a district because he was a hero. He saved it because someone finally looked at him and saw a person. And once a human knows they matter, the universe becomes negotiable. So here's the uncomfortable question hiding in all this atmospheric chaos. If power is the ability to break things, isn't love the ability to remake them? And when the world tells you to stay silent, who do you become when you choose to answer anyway? And maybe the hardest one, what do you cling to when breathing gets difficult, literally or metaphorically? If you stayed with us all the way through collapsing catwalks, glowing lungs, rebellious maintenance logs, and a cleaning bot with more emotional intelligence than most politicians, write "breathe" in the comments, so I know you're part of this strange, stubborn human tribe. Tell me the city you're watching from. Subscribe if this story pulled something in your chest. Like your oxygen levels drop to 23% for dramatic effect. Hype the video. Share it with someone who also breathes, so anyone, and tap the next story appearing on your screen, because in this universe, every ending is just another pressure valve opening.